Have felt someone rip something out of your life that wasn't just an object, but a piece of your own history? Something that carried the smell of your childhood, the sound of footsteps that no longer echo, the quiet murmur of conversations that shaped who you became? I remember the day I stood at that doorway for the last time. I didn't know yet that it would be the last, but the wind already warned me. It always does, when our spirit is about to be wounded in a way that seems beyond healing. The wood on the porch still held the marks of time, and every scratch seemed to tell a chapter of the life I lived there. The smell of the morning coffee my mother used to make still danced through my memory, like it was trapped inside those walls, and every brick, every tile, every inch of that floor, it felt carved not by hands, but by stories. Stories no one had the right to sell, but they sold it. Our home, the place where our memories lived, and it was sold in a way I never imagined anyone in my own family could have the courage to do. I always believed that certain bonds were stronger than greed, stronger than pride, stronger than the emotional distance that time insists on creating between siblings who once shared the same roof and the same bread. But they weren't. Some pain doesn't come from strangers. Some pain is born only when someone who should care for you cuts you from the inside out, without warning, without explanation, without remorse. And that's the pain I'm about to tell you about. But it's not just the pain of losing a house, because this isn't a story about a building. It's not about four walls. It's not about land. It's about emotional inheritance, about memory, about injustice, about the feeling of being betrayed by someone who shares your own blood. And it's also about something even deeper, the realization that sometimes what hurts most isn't what they take from you, but what you discover they never had the courage to say. Before I go on, write in the comments where you're listening from, your city, your state, your country. I want to know, because this story isn't just mine. It belongs to anyone who has ever lost something no one should have touched. It belongs to those who felt life slipping through their fingers because someone else held on too tight. It belongs to those who trusted and were let down, to those who had to swallow the bitter truth that appears when the masks fall inside the very home where we grew up. And if you're here, it's because there might be a bruise inside your chest that recognizes mine. Maybe there's something in you still searching for explanation, comfort, emotional justice, or simply understanding. Because I know that, so often, the deepest pains in our lives are the ones no one sees. The ones that happen in silence, inside the home where we were raised, among the people we love most, in the moments we hold closest, pains that shape us, pains that transform us, pains that never should have happened, but did. My story begins long before the house was sold. It begins in its hallways, in the sounds that filled every morning, in the voice of my mother calling my name while stirring a pot on the stove, in the way my sister and I ran through the backyard, never imagining our lives would one day head in such different directions that we wouldn't even recognize each other. Back then, when we were just two little girls living inside a tiny world, everything felt simple. Nothing prepared us for what was coming. The house, in those days, felt alive. It smelled like Sunday. It had the colors of childhood, the sound of laughter, the cool shade of late afternoons. The windows let in the light that fell on the wooden table, where my mother used to say that love was the greatest inheritance a mother could leave her children. Back then, I believed her. I believed in so much, in unity, in family, in the silent promise that we would always be together. But life has a cruel way of showing us that. Some promises only make sense to one side of the story. As the years passed, I began to notice the house carried secrets, like every old home does. Secrets I thought I understood, but now realize I never truly did. My sister was always different from me, more distant, colder, quicker to pull away from hugs, and slower to offer her own. I thought it was just her way, but sometimes someone's way reveals more about their soul than their personality. When our mother began to fall sick, I felt the weight of everything collapsing on my shoulders, and I also felt the emptiness of her absence, the kind of absence that can't be explained, only felt, a silence that screams, that unsettles, that marks. Even so, I never imagined she would have the courage to do what she did. Selling the house wasn't just a transaction, it was a rupture, a deep cut into the living flesh of our memories, a violation, not of property, but of history. And even worse, it was done in secret, as if I didn't exist, as if I hadn't fought, cried, taken care, sacrificed, as if I were just a footnote in her life. Or maybe that was the problem. I wasn't a footnote at all. I was a mirror. And some people spend their whole lives running from their reflection. Have you ever lived around someone who seems to carry hurt they never told you about? Someone who, while you're trying to mend things, is trying to blame you? Someone who holds you responsible for something you don't even know exists? That's what it was like. This story doesn't begin with the sale. It begins with an old wound I didn't know she carried, a wound that showed its true size only when the house fell into the hands of strangers. When I found out, it wasn't through her. Not out of respect, care, consideration, none of that. It was from other people. People who had nothing to do with our lives. People who had never stepped inside that home to feel the weight of the memories trapped there. People who told me like they were sharing casual news. To them, it was just information. To me, it felt like the ground disappeared beneath my feet. I tried to breathe, tried to make sense of it, tried to accept it, but I couldn't. Because the truth is, no one is ever ready to be stabbed by someone who was supposed to protect them. And worse, no one is ready to discover that something they guarded with so much love for so many years was treated like something disposable by someone who shared the same blood. I remember the feeling, a blend of shock, disbelief, and a hollow emptiness opening inside my chest. The house wasn't just a physical space, it was my mother's legacy, the story of all the women who came before us, a symbol of our strength, our fight, our sacrifice, and watching it disappear without even having the chance to fight for it, that was a kind of grief I'd never known. But before you think this story ends in loss, let me tell you, it doesn't. Because nothing in our lives ends in the moment of pain. Pain is just the doorway to everything that comes next, to everything that has been hidden, to everything that needs to be revealed before it can be healed. And as I stood there, staring at the place that had once been my home, I began to understand that there was something much deeper behind that sale, something I was yet to discover, something that would change forever the way I saw my sister, my family, and even myself. This story isn't simple, and it isn't short, because deep pain takes time to understand, and sometimes even longer to accept. But stay with me. There is so much more you need to hear, so much that may make you remember your own life, your own silences, your own losses, because what happened to me could have happened to you, or someone you know. The story is mine, but the wounds belong to many, and that's why I want you to stay, because what comes next isn't just revelation, it's truth, and sometimes truth hurts more than any lie. I always say that before pain exists, there's always a beginning, and our beginning, mine and my sister's, had nothing to do with distance, quite the opposite. When I close my eyes and go back in time, the first thing that comes to mind is the image of the two of us running barefoot through the backyard, laughing at simple things, creating worlds that existed only in our imagination. Back then, she still called me by the nickname only the two of us knew. Back then, I believed nothing could ever separate us. We grew up sharing everything. Our plates, our stories, our fears, our secrets, our dreams. And even now, when I try to understand the moment when the shadows began to form, it's hard to accept that two girls so close could one day become two women living in completely different worlds. The truth is, when you grow up under the same roof, you don't always notice when the first crack appears. Sometimes it starts small, almost invisible, a sharp word, a misunderstood gesture, a moment when our mother favored one of us, and the other pretended not to see. Other times, it begins in silence. And silence always surrounded my sister, not the peaceful kind that brings calm. It was the kind that speaks without words, a silence that held grudges I didn't know existed, grudges that, with time, grew deep roots inside her. But before I talk about the wounds, I have to talk about the bond, because there was a bond, there was closeness. There were nights when we shared the same room, staying awake for hours telling stories, making promises that nothing in life would ever pull us apart. There were afternoons when she leaned on my shoulder after something went wrong at school, and I felt like my presence alone was enough to calm any storm. There was a time when she saw me as someone important, someone safe, someone she believed was there to protect her. And that's exactly what I tried to be. A lot of people, when they look at us now, imagine that our relationship was always fragile. But it wasn't. There was love, a small, simple, childlike love, but a real one. And I think that's exactly why it hurts, realizing that what once united us became something she seemed desperate to forget. It's hard to explain to someone who has never lived it, but it feels like I held every memory with tenderness while she hid those same memories inside a box she never wanted to open again. I remember one specific day from our childhood that shaped who I became. It was her birthday. Our mother had made a simple cake, but it was full of love. The house was filled with the sweet smell of sugar browning in the oven, and the afternoon sunlight poured through the kitchen window, lighting up her face. When we sang Happy Birthday, my sister held my hand tightly. It was a small gesture, but full of meaning. In that moment, I felt that no matter what life brought, we would always have each other. It was an innocent thought, but sincere. And it's strange how some scenes stay carved into your soul, even after everything changes. But with time, I noticed my sister becoming someone more closed off. While I tried to stay close, offering support, she moved farther away, sometimes subtly, sometimes unmistakably. And still, I never imagined that distance would become deep enough to break what we had built. I never imagined she carried resentments I didn't know existed. I never imagined that one day she would look at me and see not a sister, but a rival. Life has a strange way of planting seeds of distance without us noticing. Small comparisons from relatives, compliments given more to one than the other, moments when one is recognized and the other is criticized. These things grow like weeds inside the heart, and when a person doesn't talk about it, doesn't let it out, those roots spread until one day they take over everything. I believe that's what happened to her. Small things that were never resolved, small wounds she allowed to bleed in silence. While I thought I was doing my part, she saw me as someone taking up too much space, someone who, in her eyes, received too much attention. It's ironic to think about that now, because I never felt privileged. But today I understand that what I called effort, she called advantage. What I called care, she called pressure. And what I called love, she sometimes interpreted as overshadowing. Even so, there were moments when she would come close, moments when she seemed to want my presence, my protection, my comfort. It was like there was a battle happening inside her, one part pulling away and another wanting to return to the place where she once felt safe. And maybe that's why my heart had such a hard time accepting what came later, because I knew the version of her that loved me. I saw it, I felt it, I lived it, and I know the person listening to me now might understand, because many families have dynamics like this, siblings who love each other but also hurt each other, siblings who share blood but not the same way of feeling, siblings who seem to live in different rhythms. And sometimes, all one person needs is a word, an apology, a moment of honesty. But when that doesn't happen, silence takes its place. And silence has a power that many underestimate. That's why I want you to write in the comments a simple but powerful phrase, I know how it feels. Because if you've lived something like this, you do know. You know what it's like to feel someone who should be walking beside you choose another path. You know what it's like to try to understand actions that don't make sense. You know what it's like to hold good memories of someone who now causes you pain. That phrase isn't just engagement. It lets others know they're not alone, that this story belongs to many families, not just mine. Throughout our teenage years, I did everything I could to stay close. I tried to start conversations, tried to be present, tried to build bridges, but she always seemed to take a step further away each year. And yet, every time she needed something, she turned to me. It's strange how some people only come close when they feel you can fix something for them, not out of malice, but out of habit. And because I believed that sisters are sisters, I always said yes. I thought that help, that presence, that care would be enough to shrink the growing distance between us, but it wasn't. Because while I tried to fix bridges, she quietly built a version of our story where I might have been a threat to what she wanted. I don't know. Maybe I was a mirror she didn't want to face. Maybe a reminder of something she never resolved inside herself. And it's astonishing how things left unspoken grow faster than anything we try to fix. It's as if silence has a life of its own. And I see now that the distance didn't begin in adulthood. It wasn't sudden. It formed slowly, from small attitudes I didn't understand at the time. The way she reacted when I received recognition. The way she avoided eye contact when our mother asked for my opinion. Small details, small signs, signs that make sense today, but back then seemed like nothing more than quirks of her personality. There were also moments of care between us. Moments when she showed affection, protection, presence. Like the time I got sick for a few days and she stayed by my side, bringing me water, fixing my pillow, telling stories. Or the time I almost fell off the backyard swing and she ran desperately to catch me. Those moments weren't made up by my memory. They happened. And that's why, even after everything, it's still hard to accept the reality of what we became. Maybe that's what made everything so painful. Knowing there was once love, knowing there was once care, knowing we were once different from what we became. When a relationship has always been distant, the breakup hurts less. But when there is history, when there is memory, when there is truth, it hurts more. So much more. And the strange thing is that even when our relationship started to grow cold, I still felt there was hope. That maybe, with time, she would open up. That maybe we would discover a way to rebuild what life had tried to tear apart. I believed in that. I believed deeply. And that belief is what makes everything even harder to understand. Because while I was trying to save what still existed, she was already drifting away completely, holding on to thoughts I didn't know, making decisions I was unaware of, and letting the shadows inside her erase the last trace of light between us. And that's exactly why, when the house was sold, I didn't feel only the loss of a property. I felt the loss of her, the loss of our story, the loss of our childhood, the loss of the memories I held so dearly, but that she seemed determined to forget. The loss of a bond that, no matter how fragile, still lived inside me. And as I keep telling you all this, I need you to stay with me. Because understanding who we were is the only way to understand what she did. And when I finally reveal the reason behind her choice, you'll realize that some stories run much deeper than they appear. And it's exactly at this point that I need to continue. I always say that when we look back, there are certain images time never erases. And one of those images is my mother sitting in the wooden chair on the porch, her hands resting on her lap, her fingers trembling slightly, as if carrying a weight her body could no longer hide. That fragility, which once was just a small detail no one noticed, slowly became impossible to ignore. Her hands trembled, but she was the one holding our entire family together, trying to keep two daughters close, even as we were quietly slipping apart. The house carried her scent, her rhythm, her silence. And as her illness progressed, every room seemed to feel it with her. The floorboards creaked differently, the walls felt colder, the air felt heavier, as if everything there was sharing the same exhaustion she carried in her body. I remember the first time I realized something was wrong. It was on one of those ordinary mornings when the sunlight enters the kitchen slowly. She tried to hold her cup of coffee, but her fingers wouldn't obey. The coffee trembled, spilled onto the table, and she smiled as if nothing had happened. But I saw it. I always did. Because I was there, present, paying attention. With each passing day, she seemed lighter and heavier at the same time. Lighter in her body, as if she were thinning out. Heavier in her soul, as if carrying 1,000 worries. And one of those worries, I know, was my sister. While I cared for our mother, keeping her from being alone, organizing her medications, taking her to the doctor, my sister always found a reason not to show up. First, it was lack of time, then work, then exhaustion, then silence. And silence once again said more than any excuse ever could, because when a child is truly connected to their mother, they always find a way. There's always a window of time, always a moment of presence, even if small, even if brief. But with her, something was always missing. A gesture, a visit, a simple act of care. Meanwhile, I watched my mother shrink inside her own clothes, her face losing its glow, her eyes sinking deeper, her voice growing thinner, slower. The illness wasn't fast, but it was cruel, and I carried everything, not out of obligation, but out of love, because that woman had been everything to me. She had been my foundation, my strength, my voice, my shelter, and I knew the house was a reflection of her. When she weakened, the house weakened with her. When she started forgetting things, the house suddenly felt bigger, too empty. When she no longer had the strength to sweep the porch, dry leaves began to pile up, as if they too felt something inside her was coming undone. And while all of this unfolded, my sister drifted farther away, as if she were afraid to look reality in the eye, or as if she was holding on to an old resentment that made caring feel like a burden. The imbalance between us didn't appear out of nowhere. It grew slowly. It grew in the silence. It grew in her absence. It grew the moment she stopped being a daughter and became a spectator. And I tried to fill that absence. But there were days when my body begged for rest and my soul begged for help that never came. How many times did I wish to hear a simple, "You can rest. Today, I'll stay with her." But that day never came. My mother's fragility wasn't only physical. There was an emotional fragility hidden beneath it, because she sensed her daughter's distance and tried to disguise it. She smiled when my sister finally showed up, even if only for a few minutes. She smiled like someone grateful for crumbs. She smiled like someone too afraid to face the truth, because every mother knows when a child is present in body only, and every mother feels when she's been forgotten. But she never complained, never pointed fingers, never demanded anything. She carried it all in. Silence, because she believed that speaking the truth would make the family fall apart for good. And the house seemed to understand it. It felt like it breathed with her. Some nights, when the illness tightened its grip and she could barely sleep, I stayed awake too. The wind brushed against the windows as if trying to come in and soothe something. And even exhausted, I held her trembling hand and felt the weight of everything she had lived. Sometimes I believed she trembled not only from sickness, but from fear. Fear of losing us. Fear of leaving the house behind. Fear of seeing her daughters become strangers. And even so, my sister seemed blind to it all. Or maybe she saw it and chose to turn away. I don't know. I only know that while I lived the daily burden of caregiving, she lived the daily comfort of distance. And slowly, that created layers within our relationship. Layers of misunderstanding. Layers of unequal responsibility. Layers of silent resentment. And I know the person listening to me now understands this, because many families live through this emotional imbalance where one child carries everything and the other seems to live in a different reality. I would like, right now, for anyone who has lived this difference inside their home to write in the comments, "I carried more than anyone knew." That phrase isn't just for engagement. It's recognition. It's truth, spoken out loud. It shows others that emotional responsibility, when not shared, deeply marks the one who carries it. While I handled every appointment, every medication, every pain, my sister remained distant, and that's what hurt. Knowing my mother was still waiting for her, waiting for a call that never came, waiting for a visit that kept being postponed, waiting for a hug that never arrived. I saw it in her eyes, even when she tried to hide it. The illness took strength from her body, but her daughter's absence took pieces of her soul. And no matter how much I tried to fill that emptiness, there were things only a mother feels and only a child can heal. And so the days passed, and her fragility grew. One night, she called me with a voice so soft I could barely hear her. When I leaned in, she placed her hand on my face and said she was afraid of leaving everything on my shoulders. That night, I realized she knew. She knew I was carrying everything alone. She knew my sister was far, and in a way, she knew that distance held a story that had yet to be revealed. During that period, the house became my temple and my battleground. It was where I faced illness, pain, exhaustion, loneliness, and memories that refused to fade. And while I fought to give my mother dignity until the very end, my sister seemed to exist in another world. A world where the house didn't hold the same meaning for both of us. A world where emotional responsibilities didn't weigh the same. But the truth is that my mother's fragility became the mirror that revealed the fragility of our entire family. And it was during that delicate phase that I began to notice something inside my sister that I couldn't understand. Something that might explain the sale of the house. Something that might explain her silence. Something that may have been growing for years until it became irreversible. I will never forget the day I found out. Never. because it wasn't an ordinary day or a day you expect or a day life prepares your heart for. It was a day that started like any other. The birds singing in the backyard, the smell of coffee drifting through the house, and that quiet stillness that only exists when you're trying to put your life back together after losing someone who held everything together with trembling hands. I was trying, little by little, to bring order back into what had become chaos. The pain was still living inside me, but I tried to stay steady, as if it were possible to stitch your soul back together while it's still bleeding. That morning, the house felt emptier than ever. Every corner reminded me of my mother. Every shadow carried the weight of her absence. I walked slowly through the rooms, as if revisiting a sacred place, touching the walls, the furniture, breathing deeply just to feel once more the essence of the home she had built with so much sacrifice. The house was the last piece of her I had left, the last link, the last symbol. I believed that no matter how much time passed, that place would always be ours. It would always hold our memories, our roots, our history. I believed that, with everything in me. Until that morning, the phone rang. A ring that sounded ordinary, but carried a truth that would change everything. I almost didn't answer. I was tired, exhausted from grief, lost in thought. But something inside me told me to pick it up. And when I heard the voice on the other end, I knew nothing would ever be the same. It wasn't my sister. It wasn't anyone close. It was a stranger, someone with no connection to our family, no right to know anything about our story. But he knew too much, and he spoke with a coldness that still chills me. I need to confirm some details regarding the sale of the house. The house, our house. I remember the silence that filled me on the inside, a silence so heavy it felt like my ears were full of wind. At first, I thought it must be a mistake, maybe a wrong address, maybe a clerical error. After all, I had never signed anything, never agreed to anything, never imagined someone would dare touch that home without telling me. But the stranger kept talking, going on about documents, dates, amounts, speaking as if he were discussing something simple, like selling a car, like trading any ordinary object. He didn't know. He couldn't possibly know what that house meant. Only someone who lived inside it, through pains and joys that time could never erase, could understand its worth. I interrupted him. My voice barely came out. I asked, through a breath that hardly formed words, where? He had gotten that information, and he answered naturally, as if he weren't shattering my world. Everything was arranged with your sister. Just like that. No care, no explanation, no warning. My sister had sold the house. Without looking me in the eyes, without calling me, without consulting me, without telling me, it was like being struck from behind. A clean, precise, cold blow. And at the same time, it felt as if someone had ripped from me the deepest roots of my history, because they didn't just sell a property, they sold memories, they sold sacrifice, they sold love, they sold the last living piece of my mother that still breathed inside me. I couldn't respond. My voice froze. My heart pounded. It felt like the ground disappeared beneath me. I'd always heard that some betrayals aren't loud, don't leave visible marks, but burn you from the inside. And that's exactly what I felt. A slow, searing burn that filled my chest like invisible fire. The worst part wasn't the discovery. The worst part was realizing it wasn't a mistake. It wasn't impulsive. It wasn't an accident. It was a choice, a calculated choice, a hidden choice, a choice my own sister made, knowing I would find out too late to stop it, too late to fight, too late to save what was left of our bond. While the man on the phone kept talking, explaining details that felt like knives piercing me slowly, all I could think about was my mother, her trembling hands holding our family together for so many years, her wish for us to stay united, her fear of seeing us drift apart, and her image on that porch chair, with eyes that always knew more than they revealed. She would have suffered if she knew. And maybe, somehow, she did. Maybe mothers always sense when the worst is coming. When the call ended, I stood in the middle of the living room, feeling the weight of something that didn't have a name. My legs trembled, my eyes burned, and the house felt different, as if it were looking back at me, as if it knew it was about to stop being ours, as if it were saying goodbye, silent, sorrowful, tired. I walked to the door, touched the frame with my fingertips, and felt a pain that wasn't just mine. It was as if everything there was being torn away. My mother's memory, the smell of Sunday coffee, the echo of old conversations, the nights of storms when she called us close, the childhood I lived beside a sister who now felt like a stranger. And in that moment, I realized something. You might understand deeply. When betrayal comes from someone inside your own home, it doesn't just destroy the present, it destroys the past and the future at the same time. It cuts the thread that held everything together and leaves you on the floor, unsure of where to begin again. I know many people watching this have lived something similar. That's why I want you to write in the comments, "It hurt because it was mine." That phrase carries truth, carries history, carries scars, and it shows the people who come after this that this story isn't just mine. It belongs to so many who lost something precious without having the chance to stop it. The day I found out felt like a double funeral, because in that moment, I lost the house and I lost my sister. What she did wasn't just a financial action. It was a silent declaration that I didn't matter in decisions, that I wasn't important enough to be consulted, that our relationship had ended long before the house did. I just didn't know. And even though the pain was overwhelming, something inside me also knew there had to be a reason behind what she did. A hidden reason. A reason that, at that moment, I didn't know yet, but one I needed to uncover, even if it hurt even more. When I finally managed to look into my sister's eyes, it was like staring at a cracked mirror. Nothing reflected the girl I grew up with. Nothing reminded me of the young woman who held my hand so many times, who shared secrets with me, who swore we would face any storm together. She was standing in front of me, but she felt absent. It was as if an invisible wall had been built between us, brick by brick, over years I never noticed. And when she opened the door for me, her silence spoke before any word could. A heavy silence, uncomfortable, full of memories that were never spoken and wounds that were never healed. I walked in slowly, trying not to let my heart show how hard it was trembling. She stepped back a little, as if I were invading not just her house, but the life she had chosen to build far from me. And as the door closed behind us, I felt the air grow thicker, heavier, like we were about to face the kind of silent storm that doesn't make noise but leaves deep marks. For a moment, I wanted to turn back. I wanted to run. I wanted to deny everything. But something inside me, something that had been growing since the day I received that phone call, wouldn't let me run. I needed to face it. I needed to understand. I needed, at least once, to look at her and ask the question burning in my chest, why? But before I could speak, she looked away. Not out of shyness, out of escape, like someone who knows she's about to be confronted with something she doesn't want to face. Her hands were trembling, just like our mother's did in her final years. But the difference was clear. Our mother's hands trembled from illness. My sister's trembled from conscience, from guilt, from the weight of the choices she made, knowing someday they would have consequences. Selling the house wasn't just about money. It was about everything that existed between us. I took a deep breath and tried to keep my voice steady. But when I spoke, I realized the pain slipped through the words, no matter how much I tried to hold it back. She still wouldn't look directly at me, as if the truth were stamped on my face and she didn't have the courage to confront it. When she finally lifted her eyes, I saw a mixture of restrained anger, old exhaustion, and buried sadness. It wasn't just coldness, it was something deeper, something she had been carrying alone, or thought she had been. "I just need you to tell me why." That was all I could say. The words came out quiet but steady. A sentence I know so many people watching this video have wanted to say to someone in their own family. That's why I want you to write in the comments. I also wanted to understand why. That phrase, besides being true, helps others see they're not alone, that this story lives inside many homes, many hearts, many unspoken memories. She took a long breath, the kind you take when preparing for a war inside yourself. And then, she finally spoke. Her voice came out dry, direct, almost too cold for someone who grew up by my side. She said she made the decision because it was the practical thing to do, as if the house were just any object, as if it didn't hold the weight of an entire lifetime. She said the expenses were high, that she didn't want to maintain that place anymore, that the past only brought pain, that it was time to turn the page. As if turning the page were as simple as closing a book. I listened to each word the way you listen to glass breaking, because while she spoke of practicality, I heard abandonment. While she spoke of finances, I heard resentment. While she spoke of moving on, I heard escape. Every sentence of hers reminded me that we weren't living the same story, even though we grew up under the same roof. To her, the house was weight. To me, it was roots. To her, the house was a problem. To me, it was memory. To her, it was the past. To me, it was belonging. And in the middle of her explanation, she slipped, almost without realizing it, when she said, I didn't want to stay tied to that. The house became that. Our mother's story became that. The life we lived became that. That's when I realized the problem was never the house. It never was. The problem was everything she felt she had carried alone. Old hurts, silent comparisons, feelings she never voiced. Somewhere along the way, she must have believed she was less seen, less heard, less valued. And even if those perceptions weren't true, they were real to her. And feelings, when buried long enough, transform. They grow roots, they grow shadows, they grow walls. I tried to speak. I tried to explain what the house meant to me. But she cut me off. She said that for years she felt everything always fell on her shoulders, even when the truth showed. Otherwise, she said that while I cared for our mother at the end of her life, she carried the expectations she always felt were placed on her. It was as if we had lived in two parallel worlds that were finally colliding, and the collision hurt. As she spoke, I could see tears gathering in the corners of her eyes, but she didn't let them fall, not out of pride, out of fear of admitting that deep down, she was hurting too. And in that moment, I understood something you might recognize. Sometimes what hurts isn't the betrayal itself, but discovering that the person who hurt you had been hurting for years without letting you know, without letting you see, without asking for help. But that didn't erase the pain. It didn't undo her choice. It didn't justify the way she did it, because even if she was wounded, she made a decision that tore a part of my soul out. And I will never forget this part of our conversation. She looked at me, really looked, without turning away, and said, I didn't think you'd care that much. That sentence cut through me like a blade, because someone only says that when, deep down, they believe your pain doesn't matter, or that you're stronger than you truly are. While she tried to explain her practical reasons, I understood that selling the house was her twisted response to a lifetime of unresolved emotions. It wasn't just about money. It wasn't just about the past. It wasn't just about being overwhelmed. It was about emotional abandonment, about everything left unsaid between us, about everything she kept inside until it became distance. My whole body felt heavy. It was as if each word she spoke pushed another piece of our story farther away. And still, I stayed. I stayed because I needed to hear it all. I stayed because I needed to understand. I stayed because this is the part of life no one teaches us, when we must face the truth, even when it hurts more than any lie. While she talked, I realized that nothing I said in that moment would change what had already been done. The house was already sold, the decision already made, and the bond between us was hanging by a thread. Even so, I had to keep listening, because sometimes understanding comes before forgiveness, and sometimes it never comes. But I had to try. And when I thought she had said everything, I saw in her eyes that there was something more, something still hidden, something that explained the depth of her choice. And in that instant, in that split second of silence, I understood that a buried truth was about to rise. I knew there was something hidden in my sister's silence, something she had tried to keep buried but trembled beneath every word she spoke. The way she looked away when I asked her why, the way she took a deep breath before answering. Everything revealed that the sale of the house was just the surface of something much deeper, and I felt right then that the moment had come for her to finally say the words she had held in for years, the kind of revelation that doesn't come overnight. It forms from everything that was never spoken. She stepped back, rubbed her arms as if she were cold, even on a warm day. The body speaks when the soul wants to collapse. I stayed silent, not out of patience, but because I knew her next sentence would hit like a stone. And it did. You were always Mom's favorite. When she said it, it wasn't with loud anger. but with an old, deep pain, the kind that had been carried since childhood. A pain trapped inside her for years, feeding on memories distorted by time. A pain that had grown into silent jealousy, into bitterness that was never processed, into comparisons that may have never existed in the way she remembered, but that for her were absolute truth. I took a deep breath. The sentence fell between us like a weight that cracked the floor. My sister kept talking, and every word felt like opening an old box no one remembered was there. She said our mother called me more often to talk, asked for my opinion more, trusted me more with certain responsibilities. To her that was favoritism. To me, it was simply responsibility. I never saw any difference between us, never felt I occupied a place that wasn't also hers. But her pain was real, and real pain shapes unfair actions. She started remembering moments I had forgotten myself, small situations where, according to her, our mother chose me first. A quick trip to the store, a piece of advice given, a scolding she received instead of me. I didn't remember any of it that way, but I noticed that for her, each detail had become a piece of evidence, a brick in the emotional wall she built between us. And as she continued, other revelations surfaced, things no one had ever told me, things born in the shadows of family secrets, whispered behind closed doors. She told me that after our mother began getting sick, someone in the family, someone who claimed to be well-intentioned, fed her the idea that I wanted to keep everything, that I was always the sensible one, the responsible one, the favorite. She believed it, not because it was true, but because it reinforced the story she had carried inside herself since childhood. And the more I listened, the more I realized the sale of the house hadn't been an isolated act. It was the result of years of accumulated resentment, too quiet for me to notice. It was the final consequence of an emotional conflict that had grown hidden, like a weed, while I cared for our mother. Day after day, not knowing that inside her, the feeling growing wasn't gratitude, it was distance. Then she revealed the hardest part. She said that in the months before the sale, she had been drowning in debts I never knew existed, debts she tried to handle alone, debts she was ashamed to admit, debts that made her look at the house not as a home, but as a way out. And although nothing excuses betrayal, I saw in her eyes the exhaustion of someone who was sinking and grabbed onto whatever she could to survive. But there was still more. She confessed that long before our mother fell ill, she had made a promise only the two of them knew, a promise she claimed our mother asked her to keep in secret. I don't know if that promise was real, twisted by memory, or born from her need to justify her actions, but she believed it. She truly believed our mother asked her to take care of her own life, to not tie herself to the house, to not live attached to memories, to not carry unnecessary weight. And for my sister, selling the house was how she fulfilled that promise, even if it destroyed everything between us. As she spoke, I realized her truth wasn't the same as mine, and I realized there were truths within our family no one had ever spoken out loud, truths that wound but also free when they finally come to light, truths that explain actions even when they don't excuse them, truths that reveal something essential. The betrayal didn't begin the day she sold the house. It began many years earlier, in silences, in perceived favoritism, in emotions left to rot, in wounds that never healed. And in that moment, something shifted inside me, a strange strength, a mix of deep sorrow and absolute clarity. I realized I could no longer carry that weight. I could no longer try to save a relationship she had abandoned long before I did. I needed to let go of the pain, let go of the memory of the house, let go of the expectation that she would ever return to being the sister of my childhood, let go of the bond that existed only on one side. The turning point didn't come with shouting. It wasn't a fight. It wasn't an explosion. It was silence. A silence born not of avoidance, but of decision, of maturity, of understanding, of respect for myself. I looked at her, listened to her explanation until the end, and realized that holding on to that story was hurting me every single day. It meant waking up to relive something that had no solution. It meant insisting on something that no longer had space to exist. My chest felt both lighter and heavier at the same time. Lighter because I finally saw the whole truth, heavier because that truth hurt more than I ever imagined. The sale of the house was only the final page of a book filled with painful chapters I had never read. And in that moment, something inside me changed. I let go of what I didn't want to let go. I let go of the house, even though it still hurt. I let go of the sister I wished she had been. I let go of the responsibility to fix what couldn't be fixed. I let go of guilt that was never mine. I let go of the need to be the guardian of the family. I let go because holding on was destroying me. And that decision made no sound. It didn't come with speeches. It didn't come with dramatic tears. It was quiet. It was intimate. It was firm. And it was powerful. And anyone listening who has lived something similar knows exactly what I'm talking about. That's why I want you to write in the comments, "I had to let go too." That phrase is freeing. It shows others arriving now that this story is not just about pain, it's about release. In that moment, I stood up. My sister sensed something had shifted, but she didn't know exactly what. I didn't need to say anything. I didn't need to explain. I didn't need to justify. Sometimes silence is the most dignified answer we can give to someone who hurt us. And when I took the first step toward her door, I knew I was leaving behind. Not just that conversation, but years of expectations that would never be met. And it was exactly at that point in my life, between revelation and silence, that I understood the story wasn't over yet. There was still something ahead, something I would have to face, something waiting beyond that door, beyond that confrontation, beyond that quiet goodbye. When the door closed behind me, the silence that formed wasn't abandonment. It was understanding. I walked slowly, like someone learning to breathe again after being underwater for too long. Each step carried the weight of what had just happened, of the words spoken and the ones that would never be spoken. But for the first time in a long time, I felt the weight wasn't all mine. It was as if I had finally set down an old suitcase, full of memories, full of sorrows that weren't mine, full of guilt that never belonged to me. I left a piece of that pain on that cold floor. The walk back felt longer than usual, not because of the distance, but because something inside me was shifting, a kind of quiet liberation, a slow-growing healing, as if every thought were rearranging the story of my life. I wasn't running from the pain, nor trying to forget it. I was walking through it, reclaiming what belonged to me and releasing what never did. When I approached the house, or what was left of it, I felt the wind touch my face like my mother's hand, a soft, steady touch full of meaning. And for the first time since everything began, I didn't cry looking at that place. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel revolt. I didn't feel that crushing emptiness that had followed me for months. I felt something else, something hard to describe, something like peace. I moved closer to the door and let my fingers slide across the wood, right over the same spot where I had seen my mother rest her hand so many times. She did that every time before stepping out into the yard, as if she were speaking to the house, as if she were asking for permission to leave and promising she would return. That simple gesture, one I never fully understood, suddenly made sense. She wasn't tied to the house. She was connected to it. Because for my mother, that place was never just walls. It was memory. It was strength. It was resilience. But it was never a prison. And in that moment, I understood something that changed everything. The house was only a home because we were there, because we filled those walls with life, because we wrote our stories into those windows, that porch, the peeling paint in the bedrooms, the smell of Sunday mornings. The house was the shell. We were the substance. I sat down on the porch, in the same spot where my mother loved to sit at the end of the afternoon, and looked up at the sky, remembering the times she would say that everything in life happens in its own time. A time to plant, a time to harvest, a time to lose, a time to understand. And I realized I was living the time of understanding. The time to see that true inheritance isn't written on documents, doesn't sit behind fences, and isn't locked inside the structure of a property. The inheritance lived inside me. I was the inheritance. I was the continuation. I was the living proof of everything she taught: courage, patience, dignity, faith, quiet strength, resilience. The home wasn't tied to that address. The home lived in my chest, Wherever I went, I would carry the woman she was, the stories she lived, the lessons she left behind. No sale could take that from me. No signature could erase what happened within those walls. No buyer could ever own what never belonged to the house, but belonged to our spirit. And in that quiet moment, I began to understand my sister as well. Not to excuse her, not to justify her choices, but to accept that every person walks through life carrying their own wounds. My wound was loss, hers was resentment. Both were deep, both were born from the same story. And yet, we chose different paths. And it was there, sitting on that porch, that I realized something that completely lightened the weight on my shoulders. I was not responsible for healing her wound. I was not responsible for fixing what I didn't break. I was not responsible for saving a relationship she chose to abandon long before I let go. My responsibility was to myself, to my own peace, to my own journey, to my own healing. I stayed there for long minutes, letting the wind carry away whatever no longer served me. And, suddenly, something inside me opened, a clarity I had never felt before. It was as if I could finally breathe without feeling the weight, without the tightness, without the guilt. The house no longer existed in my life as a physical space, but it existed as a bright room inside my memory, where my mother still called my name, where childhood laughter still echoed, where dreams still smelled like coffee. I ran my hand across the wood one last time, not as a goodbye, but as a thank you. The house had fulfilled its purpose. It guarded our stories. It held our pain. It sheltered our nights. It witnessed our victories and our most fragile moments. It did its job, and now it was my turn to do mine. I stood up slowly, feeling that every movement was a confirmation. I can move forward. I deserve to move forward. I need to move forward. And before taking the last step off the porch, I whispered something not to the house, but to myself. I am the home. And in that moment, the phrase became truth. That's why I want you to write in the comments, I am the home. That phrase carries strength, healing, and truth. It reminds every person that no one can take what lives inside their soul. I walked away without looking back, not because I wanted to forget, but because I understood that healing doesn't come when we erase the story, but when we learn to look at it without feeling like our chest is collapsing. And that's exactly what happened to me that day. For the first time, I could look at everything, the house, my sister, my past, without feeling that something inside me was being destroyed. It was the beginning of something new, a new rhythm, a new understanding, a new way of existing. There are moments in life when we finally understand that losing isn't the same as being weak, that letting go doesn't mean giving up, that some doors close not to punish us, but to protect us. And as I walked away from the house that once held my memories, I realized that some losses come to clear the path, to open space, to teach the soul how to breathe more lightly. Not every wound destroys us. Some wounds reveal us. Some return us to ourselves. It's strange how life, with all its harshness, also knows how to be generous. It removes what weighs us down, even when we believe we still need to carry it. It quiets what hurts, even when we insist on listening. And it brings light into places that once held only darkness. And when the light comes, we finally see that we were holding on to something we no longer needed, clinging to something that had ended long before we admitted it. When I look at everything I lived, I understand that liberation didn't come from losing the house. It came from losing the illusions. It didn't come from the end of the story with my sister. It came from the beginning of my story with myself. It didn't come from reconciliation. It came from acceptance. And acceptance isn't agreement. Acceptance is knowing that some battles aren't ours, that some people choose paths that no longer cross ours, and that there is a quiet strength in moving forward with dignity, even when the soul is tired. And that quiet strength is what I want to leave with you now. The strength to rise without noise, the strength to heal without fanfare, the strength to understand that no matter what people try to take from you, no one can remove what lives inside your spirit. No one can erase your story. No one can buy your essence. What truly belongs to you can never be lost, never. So before you leave, write in the comments a phrase that holds everything we lived here today. I choose my peace. These 4 words lift women up, free hearts, hold tired souls, and remind us that boundaries are not walls. They are protection. They are self-love. They are emotional maturity. They are the certainty that you deserve respect, rest, and healing. And now, take a deep breath. Feel your own strength. Feel that this story doesn't end in pain. It ends in truth. It ends in awareness. It ends in liberation. Because not every loss is a defeat. Sometimes it is exactly what saves us from carrying a weight that was never ours. And if this story touched your heart in any way, there is another one waiting for you now. A new story, with new scars, new lessons, new revelations of the soul. It's on your screen right now, ready to guide you through another path of wisdom, emotion, and inner strength. Every video is a different journey inside the universe we call the Matriarch Secrets. Stories that don't depend on each other, yet speak to the soul in the same way. So let yourself continue. Let yourself feel. Let yourself learn from another story that, just like this one, might touch a part of you that you didn't even know needed to be heard. The next video is right there. All you have to do is choose to follow it, because healing is learned, strength is built, and no woman has to walk alone when she finds stories that speak directly to the heart.